Survivors of comas. What was it like? Had a major open heart surgery. Almost died and went into a 2-week coma after resuscitation. Being in the coma felt like sleeping soundly, to be honest. Had an endless series of random dreams. The last dream I had before waking up was that I was riding escalators for way too long. So long that I even thought to myself in the dream, that's strange. Why aren't I waking up? Story 2. I was put into a medically induced coma for a week after I got my crap rocked by a crash. It sucked balls. 1. I could hear what was going on but had zero ways to communicate. 2. The hallucinations/nightmares was really screwed up. But that's to be expected from anyone who goes into a coma due to a traumatic event. And 3. I couldn't tell what was real and what was a dream for a very long time, and still have moments where I have loud and severe auditory hallucinations that convince me I'm back in my non-consensual nap time. Also, something that isn't well known is, after an extended period of strong as crap meds and not moving, besides when the nurses roll you like a California roll, your muscles forget how to work. It took me about a month of rehab to get enough strength to lift a large cup of water, but it was absolutely necessary, and although it was scary as hell, I survived, and I had a less than 10% survival chance. And it's all thanks to the amazing, strong, and caring nurses and specialists. I was able to return to my babies and my future husband. Still, 0 out of 10 though, would not recommend. Non-consensual nap time is a great name for a coma. Just wanted to say that, but OP, I'm glad that you recovered well and are doing well now. Story 3. My son was in a medically induced coma for 11 days following an accident. He remembers nothing of those 12 days, and the 2 weeks following are still hazy after 4 years. He was struck by a speeding car while skateboarding. He suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, jaw broken in 4 places, molars knocked clean out of their sockets, broken clavicle, ribs, pelvis, ruptured spleen, carotid arteries nearly ruptured, needed a chest as well as a peg feeding tube. I'm grateful he has no recollection of any of this. Story 4. I got in a car accident in 2016. No head trauma, thank God, but I was in and out of consciousness for about a week. I have 3 memories and flashes of asking for water about 1 trillion times. The 3 memories were 1. My friend Rosa coming to see me. I think I woke up for like a minute and went back into oblivion. 2. Waking up and having a tingling feeling. I fractured 4 or 5 vertebrae and had a burst fracture on my L4. The tingling feeling was in my right leg. And then I notified my mom or dad, honestly don't remember, who then got a doctor who promptly told everyone to leave, and then I was back out again. 3. Complaining to my parents about one specific nurse who I blamed for not letting me have water in my haze of drugs. Story 5. The worst thing in my opinion is the atrophy that happens while you're not moving. I was in a coma for a month, and I had to build up my muscles to be able to walk and climb steps again. I think I made it from my door to the next one the first time they got me out of bed, and I cried because of the mixture of physical and mental pain. The first time I tried to climb a flight of stairs, I just went at it like normal, and was exhausted before coming close to the top. The rehab person had to explain to me that for now it was getting both feet on the step before going to the next one, like how old people climb stairs. It ended up taking over a year before my body was anywhere close to normal. I also had the skin peeling on my hands and feet shortly after I woke up. Story 6. My sister was in a coma for over a month from a car accident. She was asleep in the backseat on a road trip and her friend flipped the car on the freeway, trying to avoid something on the road by swerving. In a panic, she hit the gas instead of the brake. She had a bruise on her brain, which was kind of like her being mentally handicapped, but each day she got better. Now she's completely recovered and back to normal. When she woke up, she told us she had a dream where some mystery guy shot her, and that's what she thought happened. No recollection of the car accident. I have this weird feeling I'm going to be afraid to drive after this. Car accidents are scary stuff, man. And I know statistically they don't happen very often, all things considered, but still, the results are horrifying. Happy for your sister's recovery, OP. Story 7. I was about 7 when it happened. I was playing around on a swing and apparently fell over and hit my head. Also, swallowed my tongue in the process. Fortunately, people around me were quick to react. Somebody reached down my throat and took out my tongue and called an ambulance. I don't really remember it after that. I just remember waking up at the hospital the next day. My mother was standing next to me, and as I woke up, she started asking questions like my name and what her name was. I remember being really confused. I was like, Mom, what sort of silly question is that? Turns out, I'd woken up at some point in the ambulance and had no idea who my mom and dad were, as they were in the ambulance with me. Definitely not a fun experience. But the worst part was that doctors said I couldn't eat chocolate for like a month after that. Story 8. I'm not a survivor, but my cousin was in one for a month. He woke up, looked around, and began to scream like a lunatic, and saying someone's name. However, after that day of waking up, he didn't remember a single thing. The name he was screaming was Anna. No one there knew who Anna was. The doctors believe it was a deep coma dream. He spent 3 weeks after that shaking. He had a lot of issues walking properly and forming more than than 2 sentences without stuttering like crazy. I'm very close with him, and when I ask him about Anna, his mood changes drastically. All he says is he doesn't want to talk about it. Pursuing it further would make him break down crying or make him scream at you. He's a lot better now, other than when he's asked who Anna was. Okay, you know that thought experiment, I guess, where it's like, what if you just woke up and realized that your entire lived life is a dream? It almost feels like that's what happened here for a very specific relationship of some kind. And even just the thought experiment has really messed with my head. Like, I hate the idea of that, and I can't imagine it happening to me. If anything close to that happened to this guy, I feel for him. That must be a truly soul-wrenching experience. I don't know another way to say it. Just brutal, man. Story 9. I was in a coma approximately for 2 weeks. My medical records say Glasgow coma scale of 7. I don't remember anything. I remember waking up tied down to a bed in a hospital. The nurse told me that I had tried to get up, and that if I got up and got hurt, he would be responsible. When I had the accident, I had a closed head injury, and I was paralyzed on my right side. They left me tied down for a while until I was transferred to Army Hospital. I had to learn how to walk and talk again. I was able to talk when I woke up, but I was stuttering enough to require speech therapy for a few months. It took a while before I could walk again, and a few months until I could leave the hospital. One of the things I remember was the orientation tests when I woke up. The doctors or nurses ask simple questions. What is your name? What day is it? Where were you born? Who is the president? I believe I may have answered Ronald Reagan a few years after George H.W. Bush was elected. I have a weird memory of the scene from the movie Born in East LA where they ask who the president is and he answered, that actor. I had went from running 10 miles per day to not being able to walk. My mom said that she had talked to me while I was at St. Joseph Barrow Neurological Hospital, but I only remember the days after I came out of the coma, before I was transferred to the Army Hospital. My mom came to the hospital and she would push me around in the wheelchair. I never regained my physical abilities after the accident. I ride a bicycle a lot, but I never really started running again, and I never regained my strength after the accident. Most people would never notice anything wrong with me, but there was enough damage for me to be medically retired from the Army. It has been 30 years since the accident, so I don't remember the details that well. Story 10. I was in a coma for 2 weeks, and my family was told to start making arrangements. My wife, my 3 boys, all adults, were with me around the clock. I don't remember anything at all, but later, much later, when I made it through and was out of the hospital, I didn't feel like listening to music, especially the Beatles or Led Zeppelin, as well as some others which are my favorites, and I have playlists for all my different moods. It made me depressed and angry. We all had gotten together and I was told that my family played these playlists non-stop. The thing is, I always have some music on, and as far back as I can remember into my youth, I've had something always playing, or at a concert searching for new music. I'm now back to listening to most of my favorites 2 years later, but not with the same excitement. I actually find this one of the most heart-wrenching ones. Losing the love you had for something, like when you had such a deep, intense passion for it, waking up from this coma and just not feeling it anymore, that's gotta feel like a piece of you is just missing. And maybe I'm overly sympathetic because I'm such a big music guy, but I just simply can't imagine. Story 11. It was bizarre. Last thing I remember was the respiratory tech came into my general floor hospital room to give me a treatment. Next thing I know, she's calling in the floor nurses saying we have to get her to ICU now. Someone said we need doctor's orders, and the tech said, I don't care, we're going now. 7 days later, the breathing tube is removed and I start coming to reality. The first day I was so out of it, I thought Oprah had found a cure for cancer. I also for some reason decided to attack a nurse, and I tried to run and promptly fell face first into a counter. I broke my nose. The weeks following were very strange. I developed a fear of falling asleep and had mild hallucinations. All in all, 0 out of 10. Don't recommend. Story 12. My father survived recently a cardiac arrest. He was in a coma for almost a week. When he was strong enough to talk, we asked him what he remembered. He said he remembers being wheeled constantly to different parts of the hospital, endless doors, constantly being wheeled in. Most likely it's a recurring scene of him in the ER as docs were trying to revive him. He was completely out for around 3 to 4 days, and would wake up sporadically for the remainder of the week until he was finally released from ICU. We asked him if he saw any door or white light, tunnel, or anything. He just said nope. Only doctors bustling around him. Story 13. I was in a coma for 6 days following a car accident. When I woke up, I was, for some reason, very angry at my mom and my girlfriend's boss. Didn't have a reason to be, and I never understood why I woke up mad at these 2 people in particular. Otherwise, I was in a good mood. Turns out my mom was in the room with my girlfriend and kept insisting that I would be in a wheelchair and have to be spoon-fed for the rest of my life. My girlfriend's boss had called her 3 days after the event, ringing her out saying, I need to know when you're going back because we need the staff. The doctor said that when someone is in a coma, they can still hear what's going on around them. However, because their brain is still healing and they aren't technically conscious, they can still feel emotions but never remember what was said. I'm also a huge believer in proven theory. That's a word I just made up, I think. But basically, I believe that if someone is going to say something, they better have some form of proof to back it up. Then, my car accident happened. What I've seen, I expect others like old me to argue. My grandmother passed away just under a year prior. My one grandfather passed away about 12 years earlier. And my other grandfather I never actually got to meet. But I also recall being in a dark room, seeing all three of them. I ran to give them a hug for obvious reasons, but they kept backing up, saying, "Not yet." I'm sure science will say something that makes sense, but I refuse to believe it. Dang, OP went into a coma and came out with like a religious experience. Or a supernatural one at the very least. And hey, fair enough, OP. You saw that. You were there. And I'm not going to try to tell you that it didn't happen for you, because it did. And you know what? It probably enriched OP's life in some ways. I don't know how exactly, but I'm sure it did. So that experience in particular, net positive. The whole coma thing, probably not. But hey, at least OP got something out of it. Story 14. Never been in a coma personally, but my BFF was in one for 3 months after a motorcycle accident. He told me some weird stuff / had some crazy trauma from it. 1. Endless hallways in a hospital where he was running away from some unidentified shadowy thing. 2. Ran into a room full of crazy surgical instruments and had a mad scientist who strapped him down to a bed to experiment on him. He later speculated it may have been influenced by the straps on the bed he was laying on in real life. 3. Gargoyles, at least that's what he called them. The little gray ones wanted to hurt him, but the big reddish-brown ones scared them all off. Apparently it wasn't safe either, but it ignored him rather than hurt him. 4. He would often call me in the middle of the night. I got off work around 2 a.m. and could never sleep right after work, and he would have me come over to sit with him. At these times his mood could range from normal to bouncing off the walls to crying in terror. One of these times was not long after he had brought a new puppy home. He called me over because he was afraid to be alone with it. Apparently it reminded him of the red gargoyle. I don't know if comas cause PTSD, but I would fully believe that he had it. Story 15. I was stabbed in the heart in an attempted murder. Emergency open heart surgery later, I was put into an induced coma. I was awake and very aware throughout the entirety of the ordeal, up until they cut me open. In my unconscious coma state, I was in bed with this lady standing at the foot of my bed telling me I should sleep. When I tried to sit up, she conjured a heavy, comforter-like blanket that dropped on me, pinning me to the bed, saying I shouldn't struggle if I was so tired to sleep. I remember screaming and screaming under the weight of the blanket, just trying to keep myself awake. Falling asleep was the last thing I wanted. Suddenly, I was just underwater, in bed but submerged, and all my screams were muffled. The lady was still at the foot of my bed, her voice unencumbered or muffled unlike my screams, which just became garbled and weak and faint. "Sleep," she repeated intermittently, "sleep." I can't explain how I did it, I just never gave up. I beckoned and invoked God in the name of everything that is good and in the name of Jesus. I begged the universe to lend me energy, strength from the cosmos to save myself. I bargained and agreed to suffer whatever would result from waking, whatever pain came afterwards. I knew what was going on at this point. I knew this was it. It was Hail Mary time. I was running out of options and losing. I don't know how I knew, but I was losing. With every ounce of will that I had left, I let out a final defiant scream like a toddler that didn't want to take his nap, like a Super Saiyan transcending his limits. Maybe it was the prayer. Maybe it was the bargaining with the universe. Maybe it was simply my defiance and pure stubbornness. But the lady vanished. My bed rushed up to the water's surface, or maybe the water level lowered. Whatever. I broke through the water and jumped out from under the blanket out of the bed, and I woke up. I had a tube sticking out of my face, breathing for me. My doctor and family were there, and I couldn't breathe. I didn't want this machine breathing for me. I wanted to breathe for myself. They quickly realized what was going on and rushed to take the tube out of my throat. I thanked God and Jesus and the universe and the stars. I thanked the doctors and the nurses and everything and everyone I could. I was just so happy to breathe. Every now and then I remember that nightmare and the lady, her cold voice, and I thank everything. I call my mom just to hear her, and I smile and am thankful her boy didn't die in the street like an animal. It's the worst thing I'm thankful for. It's opened my eyes in many ways, but I was never so thankful like at that moment, and when I remember I try to be as thankful as I can. Story 16. I was in a coma for 2 weeks after getting toxic shock from a back surgery that I had. I was admitted to a step-down unit because they didn't really know what was going on with me. By the afternoon, I was confused and having trouble breathing. They transferred me to ICU. As soon as I went through the ICU doors, I coded. The last thing I heard the doctor say was an F-bomb. I woke up 2 weeks later. I didn't see a light when I coded. However, I did have a dream that I was taken to a cavernous room that was very dark. On one huge wall was a picture of a puzzle which had pieces missing. A voice was talking to me about the puzzle. It told me that the puzzle was the story of my life, and there were still pieces missing. My puzzle wasn't complete, so I had to go back. The voice told me that when I went back, I needed to remember what had happened there, and I needed to tell people. It was a very comforting feeling. When they were transporting me to ICU, my mother was in the elevator with me. Only thing is, she had been dead for almost 4 years by then. I saw her one other time while I was in the ICU, and it was when I was having a hypertensive crisis. The worst part of it all for me was when I was extubated, when they removed the breathing tube. You have to be awake. It's like trying to breathe through a straw. It's absolutely horrible. Also, my husband made a CD for me. This was in 2004, which they played while I was in my coma. A few years later, I found the CD in a drawer, and I didn't know what was on it. I played it. As soon as the music started, I started bawling. I didn't know why. My husband came to see what was wrong. I told him I didn't know. He then realized what CD it was. He told me he made it and it was played for me while I was in my coma. I had no idea until then it was made. My sister said every time she came to see me, she would whisper into my ear, "Don't you frickin' die." So I didn't. Story 17. As a kid, I liked to climb things. We were in Key West on some random vacation when I was climbing the underside of our boat like a rock wall climber. I feel almost at the pinnacle of the tip of the boat. When my head hit the rocks, my vision turned into a static screen and my body was paralyzed. I was able to hear and was aware of what was going on, but my body wasn't responding to anything. I heard the crunch of rocks as my brother ran and picked me up. The scream of my mom as the truck sped toward the hospital. At that point, the mind is fuzzy. I awoke with Mickey, Donald, and Goofy hand puppets. They released me back with the family and I spent the rest of the vacation on a fold-out lawn chair with wires glued to my chest and head. Half my childhood permanently disappeared. Can't remember anything. OP is lucky. A head injury from any height is dangerous business. There's a reason why parents don't like it when their kids climb stuff. Things can just go bad so fast. OP, don't get me wrong, I'm glad for your recovery, I am. But it's definitely true that you are fortunate with this outcome. Story 18. A friend of mine has had 2 comas. He was in a small plane when it crashed, and he went out for a smoke and disappeared. Turned out he was run over by a motorcycle avoiding a car. I remember this really well because he was working for a client of mine. He was working late a lot. When his client came into the space, all of his stuff was on the desk. He was just gone. They called me out of the blue asking if I knew where he was. He was in intensive care for 2 weeks. When he tells me of his experience, he says he was flying through the sky over mountains, then past our planets and our solar system. He always tells me he can't wait to leave his bone cage and go back to traveling through the galaxy. It was the most beautiful experience he ever had. Story 19. Not sure if this counts as a coma, per se, but during my junior year of high school, I contracted viral meningitis, and I thought it was just a really bad flu. The last thing I remember was puking in my sink and then stumbling into my room, and then just black. Apparently, my mom found me seizing on the floor, so I was taken to the hospital where they told my mom the next 24 hours would determine if I lived or died. I have no memory of this myself, but apparently during either the first or second day I was in the hospital, I went absolutely postal as my brain was swollen, and I tried to fight the doctors and nursing staff screaming, saying I wasn't going to let them end me. I guess I was in absolute survival mode, so they had to have several nursing staff along with my family hold me down while I was being sedated. Now again, I don't remember any of this, but I clearly remember having some sort of dream where my face was being pressed into a pillow and I was being held down. After this, I was out for about 3 days. The first day I woke up, I don't remember, but my mom said she could tell by looking at me I wasn't lucid, and I guess I kept asking where I was before going under again. The next day, I remember. I woke up and the doctor came in and made a joke along the lines of, "Oh wow, you're alive." And that was a really big what the hell moment for me. Then my mom came in and broke into tears, saying she knew I was really conscious this time because she could see it in my eyes. Anyway, the whole experience was like a really long sleep. I only had the one dream of being held down, though I do recall at one point I was able to think semi-clearly, even though I wasn't conscious, I guess. I don't know how exactly to explain it, but I was able to think how this sleep was very long, and I questioned whether I was alive or not. Also, when I first tried standing up, I heard a liquid splatter on the floor, and realized I had crapped my buttless hospital gown, which was a side effect of all the meds they pumped into me. I was not informed of this side effect until after the fact. Anyway, walking was hard for the first few days, and I felt very weak for a while. I was also an athlete, but after the fact I was unable to play football and rugby as a hit to the head could end me, so I had to hold off for a year. But when I returned, my hand-eye coordination was still very off for a while. All in all, it was an interesting experience. I think it made me realize how mortal I am, as I could have died then and there and not have even known it. Story 20. Disorienting. I was out for 2 days when I was 11 years old. A literal diabetic coma. It's how I was diagnosed. I have flashes of being surrounded by a flurry of nurses and doctors, and then nothing. I woke up in the ICU confused. I remember not being surprised when I heard the diagnosis. It felt like I already somehow knew. I thought that was it until I spoke with my mom recently. I mentioned the boy in the ICU bed across from me, how vividly I remember his constant screaming that first day, soon replaced by very poignant silence. My mom said she recalled, but I shouldn't. He was there when I first entered the ICU, but was long gone before I came to after the second day. To be fair though, I had started hallucinating shortly after slipping into the coma, so maybe I just dreamed it. The crazy part though is I can physically see him in my memory, and the description matches what Mom remembered. Brains are weird. Story 21. Luckily, I've never been in one. My younger brother has, though, when he was like 3. The only thing he remembers is the time before he came back. Kind of creepy. Anyhow, I was just watching videos about that the other day on YouTube. Some people that last years in a coma say they remember people who were there being a part of their life all those years ago. They even said they held a job, had a normal life, and when they wake up, they mourn the loss of those people, because everything seemed so real. I wonder if people just go to another dimension while in a coma. It's creepy but fascinating at the same time. Story 22. I was very young, like 8 years old or something. I had a very serious allergy which affected my breathing, and I felt the worst an 8-year-old could ever feel. My legs felt terrible to the point where I could barely walk. My dad went full speed in the car to the hospital, where when I got out of the car I immediately passed out in his arms. He carried me into the ER. I don't remember anything. Later I woke up to see my dad telling me, "Everything is gonna be alright." And I panicked because I could feel my body and stuttered the words, "What's wrong with me?" Last thing I remembered was when one of the doctors stuck a needle into my leg. I didn't feel anything, and at the time it looked like he stabbed me. I panicked and just blacked out. I ended up waking up in the morning the next day in my bed, forgot about the entire thing, and only remembered my dad's crazy driving skills on the way to the hospital. Later on over the months, I started to recall what happened at the times I was awake. Story 23. Medically induced coma for 5 or 6 days after they screwed up a surgery. Apparently, I'm quite resistant to anesthesia and whatever they use during a coma, because I was never very deeply away. My mom said I twitched when doors slammed shut somewhere. Also, I remember waking up for a couple of seconds when a doc visited me. In the end, they woke me up from the coma after I somehow woke up and pulled the breathing tube out of my throat. I can't remember that part, but I remember docs looking very concerned when I came by and I had a breathing mask on. The time between basically was like sleeping. I remember very faint dreams and a voice saying, "We did everything. He'll have to fight this fight from now." I had pneumonia and sepsis. The time afterwards was weirder. The brain really doesn't like the time gap, and the couple of days afterwards are quite a bit of jumbled mess in my memory. Story 24. A little backstory. I've had nightmares since I was a kid, varying from monsters in the closet to seeing people die. I got hit by a car and went under for a week. During that time, I had nightmares worse than any I've previously had. The one I remember most is about getting hit by the car and waking up to see people looking down at me. They didn't move or say anything. They had this weird, blank look in their eyes. It was almost as if they were looking past me. I stand up and ask what the hell is going on, but they're still looking down at the ground. I look down too, and see an endless void below me, and then I start falling. I try screaming and calling for help, but there's no sound. It's like the sound was being consumed by the void around me. Looking up, I can see the people above me and the light getting further and further away. It felt surreal. Eventually, I can't see anything and it's just black, but darker, more oppressive. I remember thinking it's like the black is glowing. Suddenly, I hit the ground hard. The pain I felt from landing was excruciating for a few seconds, then it was gone in the blink of an eye. It's still dark, but at least I wasn't falling. I walk around trying to figure out what the hell is going on for what felt like hours. Then I start hearing a low sound from all around me. It's like a very deep bass that just kept getting louder and louder. I try covering my ears, but it's useless. It just kept getting louder. I closed my eyes as if that would help, and curled up on the ground. Eventually, it stops. I open my eyes again, but now I see something very far away. It was glowing. I get up and start walking to it. As I get closer, I can start hearing whispers. A few words I can make out are, "He's coming. Can it see us? I feel weird. There's nothing we can do. Help. I can feel you. I can hear the dead. Someone's coming. Help. Where is it? I want to go home." The whispers are overlapping so much that I feel like I'm in a crowded room. I get a little closer to the light and then stop. It changed. There's 2 now, and it looks like a pair of eyes. I feel a chill run throughout my body when it blinks. The voices stop immediately when it does. Then, one more says, "It sees you." It blinks again. When it opens its eyes, it's a few inches from me, but I still can't see what it is. I can smell decay and death. The deafening bass starts again and the area around me lights up. It isn't blinding, but I can see what's in front of me now. It looked like a zombie or some stuff you'd pull straight out of a horror game. I remember thinking, okay, time to wake up, but I didn't. I couldn't. When I realized that, I turned around to run away, but I see thousands of eyes behind me. The light goes away just as one lunges at me. I can feel them grabbing at me. They didn't try eating me or whatever, just touching me. I can feel their hands everywhere. Some of them are missing fingers or skin or are just bone. I open my mouth to scream, but a hand jabs into my mouth. The taste was awful. It keeps going deeper and deeper into my mouth. I try taking it out, but it was like grabbing onto air. There was nothing I could do. I've never felt so helpless in my life, and suddenly it stops. There isn't a hand in my mouth. There aren't monsters. I can't smell anything. I'm still in the void, though. I hear a demonic-type voice say, "You cannot escape. You are damned here forever." I still have nightmares about that to this day. I don't believe in God or heaven or hell, but I genuinely believe I was in hell. Back in the real world, as my dad would tell me, I would make these weird guttural groans, open my eyes, get really pale, and my heartbeat would go up randomly. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking this too. It sounds kind of like a creative writing assignment. Sure. That being said, I don't know, I kind of just trust OP on this one. I guess I don't see a reason not to. After all, they're just describing a terrifying dream they had. It's not like they're saying it really happened. So what's the harm in believing them, right? And hey, I've had some weird freaky dreams. I don't usually remember them this well, but there's weird stuff going on in there at night. Being in an actual coma, I can only imagine. Especially since OP said they already had a history of nightmares and stuff. It does just sound like a nightmare turned up to 11. Anyway, that is the last story for today. Comas, admittedly, have always freaked me out, and I have always been curious, does it just feel like sleeping? And the answer from this thread seems like a resounding maybe. Anyway, for now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.